Afternoon, Mike.
Afternoon, Joel.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing absolutely wonderful.
Welcome to another episode of the podcast. Another week's passed. What have you been doing lately?
Actually, funny enough, I have finished up that remix for Big Gigantic and moved straight into sound design mode because I have been asked to make a sample pack for the one and only Splice.
That's pretty incredible. Have you been working on it for a little while, or is it? Are you just starting here?
Actually, yeah, funny. Yeah, that's a good question. I have been working on it for a long time, sort of on and off, but the idea was proposed to make a sample pack a little while ago. I don't know exactly the date, but probably last year sometime we were floating the idea of putting a sample pack on because my managers also run Westwood Records, and they've got a contract with Splice doing a sound pack for like Westwood Sounds as their brand. So they're doing like artist packs from like Westwood artists and other guest artists and stuff. So they asked me, and we didn't have like a set deadline on it or anything like that. But since they asked, I started just sort of packing samples up like as much as I possibly could, and just kind of like anytime I made something cool, I would start saving it and just sort of building up a folder. And it got to the point where I have like way more than enough samples and almost too many that are kind of the same. So
well, it's a lot of samples, right?
Phase.
Like for a pack, it's not like it's not like 20 or 30 samples. It's a pretty large collection, right?
Yeah. So apparently the magic number is like 300-ish samples.
Okay.
Around there. And that actually makes sense to me when I heard it the first time, because like you use Splice a little bit here and there, but if you're if you're using Splice and you find a sample pack that you're going through and you're like, oh, I like a lot of these sounds, like maybe I'll just download the whole pack. Like the first thing you do is look at how many credits that's going to cost you, right? And so if you see the pack and it's like 700 credits, it's like, okay, do I really want to download 700 samples? Like you have to really trust the person.
It's quite a bit. Yeah, because how many do you get a month for regular subscriptions? Like 100, right?
I'm actually not 100% sure. Like I use it less often than I get the credits back, so they just kind of keep building up.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's a maximum number. I don't know if they changed that, but there used to be a maximum. So like if you weren't spending them, like your credits would just stop at like 1,500 or whatever. So it was kind of like encouraging you to like come back and spend them, because then you will get replenished.
Yeah.
Whereas if you just don't use it, then it will just cap a certain amount. I'm not sure if they're still doing that.
But you're still paying $7 or $8 a month and you just get nothing for it?
Yeah. So if you don't use the website and you're paying for it, then your credits don't go up. So that's kind of sad, but an understandable marketing strategy.
That's a pro tip. Double check. Make sure you're not over the maximum in your Splice account if you've got one.
Yeah, 100%. But I never really thought about what the magic number was. Like I was kind of in the mindset that like the more the merrier, but at the same time, like I said, if you're going to spend 700 credits, it's going to be on a pack that like that you can trust, that like all of these samples are going to be good.
Yeah.
And otherwise, if I see 700 samples, I'm like, okay, well maybe I'll just download the ones that I hear that I like, and I may or may not go through the whole thing. And then on the other side of it, it's like if you have only 50 or 100 samples in your pack, it's like that's so few that it's pretty easy to just go through them all and then pick the ones you want.
Well, and another thing too is it's not like it's 300 kick drums. It's like there's all the different categories, right? Like how many different, is it 300 again for just the sounds, or is that also the presets?
No. The presets is a whole different thing.
Okay.
But for samples, it's for a whole well-rounded pack, it's about 300, and it gets divided kind of like similar to the way that like I organize a project, or that anyone would with like stems, where it's like vocal samples, drum one-shots, drum loops, and then there would be subcategories in both of those, which is like kicks, snares, percussion, cymbals, effects, miscellaneous Foley or whatever. Yeah. And then loops, same thing, subdivided however you want. And then the way that they have it, actually, there's an outline from Splice that's like, guideline to a good folder structure. It's like melodic stuff. And then in there, you've got your like, leads, chords, basses, and those are all one shots. And then another folder would be like melodic loops, which again would have all your instruments, bass, lead, whatever have you. And then the last one is your effects, which has got your, impacts, risers, sweeps, and miscellaneous textures and
stuff,
such.
Yeah. Just kind of
everything that's not a musical thing, but potentially musical tool.
Yeah. Yeah. Just like a texture.
Yeah. So anyway, they asked me to do that, and like I was thinking about like what I want in a sample pack. And when you've been collecting samples as long as I have, you get to the point where you're like, I don't really need any more hi-hats or, snare drums or kick drums. I'm sure everybody's always looking for good kick drums. And, it's expected that, if I'm going to put out a sample pack, there should probably be some kick drums involved. Otherwise, people are going to be like, where are the Kotek kicks, right?
Yeah.
So obviously I'm including those, but I personally tend to go to Splice looking for mostly weird, interesting atmosphere type background noises or like weird effects, things that are detailed and interesting sounds, but things that I wouldn't have exactly. Yeah. That's 100% it. Or things I just don't want to put the time into, samples is like, when I'm going to use a sample, it's like things that are like so simple, it's pointless to waste the time producing the sound, like if it's a riser or like a sweep or whatever, like anyone can grab some white noise and put a filter on it, but like, so there's a bunch of them that someone did, and like there's a bunch of different like versions of it that sound kind of like different and exciting or whatever. It's like I might as well just grab one of those.
It can be convenient, yeah. Or you can make them yourself, but that's time, it just depends upon whether you want to just save yourself some time, just spend a couple credits.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I'll end up looking on Splice for. And then also like vocal one shots and stuff, but it ends up being like very minimal components because I've, personally, I've gotten to the point where I can produce from scratch like whatever main sound that I want for the song. And like by that, I mean like I'm not going to go on Splice and look for a sample that's going to be so important to my song that it is like the defining sound of my song.
Yeah, 100%. And also from my perspective, where I go to it mostly is actually for rhythmic loops, whether they're melodic or just purely percussion, because sometimes you just get stuck in your head. And I would say that I have a lot less rhythmic training than you do. You can sit on drums and like jam out for like an hour and come up with a ton of great stuff. But for me, I don't have as much of a background. I don't use fills per se, but often like I'll grab a hi-hat loop and I'll just chop out. All it is literally the delay offbeat, like the groove offbeat of that one sound. And I'll literally just use that as a one shot, but in the position that it was in the original loop. So I'm not using the whole loop, but I'm just grabbing like that one hi-hat that was the swing hi-hat of the loop and then putting that into my own arrangement to add kind of that little extra texture on top, because a lot of that stuff is really what makes your sound, like makes the kind of, I'm talking house right now, but like, having that little extra hi-hat there, you can learn a ton from you just buy a pack of loops, boom, they basically learned all of the house hi-hat programming in like a pretty short period of time if you just look at the
it's got everything you need. And it's funny that you mentioned that because, like, I am a drummer, but at the same time, like, if I want to record a real drum set, I got to mic it, and there's a very rare chance that it's going to actually sound as good or better than something that was recorded, like, professionally at a studio or, like, a processed sample. And then even on the electric kit, like, it's great for some things, like for fills and stuff like that, but even on its own, like I'm not going to use it to create the core of my drum sounds unless I'm kind of going for like a more ironically acoustic drum type of feel. Cause this is set up like a normal drum set, hi-hat, toms and kicks and snares. But so even being a drummer, I actually look a lot for background percussion loops too. Yeah. Because when I write drums, you're always going to use your own kick and your own bass, and maybe you'll write like your one hi-hat pattern or something like that. But generally that ends up not being enough to fill up like the whole spectrum of like rhythmic components that can be in one song. Yeah. So a really good technique is to just like write a simple drum line with, snare, kick, hi-hats, and maybe like your own couple percussions. Yeah. And then you just grab a nice loop, throw it over top, and then work that loop into the groove to kind of tie it all together and fill up the empty space.
Well, and it'll really set your it kind of sets the the mood. It can help really set the mood of the track and help you kind of figure out what you're actually going for. Sometimes it's just having those set up. It's funny. I've been watching a lot of the Kenny Beats live streams as well as just the Cave sessions, which are highly recommend. That's a huge, like, it's so funny. Some of them are like the best things ever, really well edited, but it's also really interesting to see his technique. But what he'll do is, you know, he doesn't write songs that he's going to release with loops, really. I mean, I think he produces all that stuff after the fact, but when it comes down to like the performing, so having a rapper in and whatnot, he just grabs anything. He's got no limits, uses any loops he wants to just find out what the actual vibe of the song is going to be, because that's just the speed. It's almost like he's prototyping the song, and loops can be huge for that. So that's kind of he'll just grab those, and, you know, even if it's just kind of junk, but it will influence the bass line he writes, and then boom, he's found the bass line. Now he can go back and fix those drums up and make them sound a little better.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that you mentioned that too, because I find so many times, like, whenever I'm writing a song, every single part of the song influences all the other parts of the song. But when you add another thing, so like say I start with a drum loop, I'm going to write a bass line that matches that drum loop. But then after I write that bass line, maybe that will influence me to change that drum loop.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like when you multi-track, like if you're, you know, I imagine the most often used scenario in this case would be like a one-man band sort of thing.
Like FKJ,
which is like, yeah, well, exactly. Perfect example. So if I had to produce a song, like all four parts, drums, bass, guitar, and vocals on my own, like make like a rock song, first thing I'd do is I'd lay down a basic drum line, right? Then I would play bass or guitar along to it and like get a riff going. And then, you know, once I've got the bass and the guitar riff there, I would probably delete the drum channel and then re-record the drums over top of the bass and guitar, because now I can react to the rhythms of the bass and guitar that I didn't know were going to be there before.
Going to be there, exactly, yeah. A visual analogy of that would be if you think about somebody drawing a portrait of somebody's face, they don't spend 9 hours getting the nose and all the shading done. They do a sketch of the whole face, and then they erase and they get all the proportions right before they kind of go in and do that detail. They do it all in pencil before they, you know, do the colors and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, 100%. Whereas here, I'm usually writing my tracks like it's a paint by numbers, and I'm doing each square perfectly one step at a time.
You paint with Microsoft Paint, and you do one pixel at a time, and you just go get the color, paint.
That's how I did Photoshop back in the day. I shit you not. I would literally go to Microsoft Paint and use the zoom tool, which doesn't even have like a linear zoom. It's just like 3 stages, like more, or more, and I would zoom in as far as I could and delete individual pixels one at a time and then zoom out. My eyes were burning at the end of, like, I was just trying to make like one little like emoji or like a sprite for a video game, and I'm like, it's like just so relentless, like trying to like do this with Photoshop or with not Photoshop. Oh man. But yeah, so that being said, coming back to the usefulness of loops, that was quite a distant tangent that we just ended up on.
Yep.
It's loops and samples are really good at filling up the empty space that's left over when you get to that point where you're like, something's missing, you know? Exactly, I wrote all the parts, but it just for whatever reason doesn't feel complete.
Yep. And they just point you in the right direction. For me, they're 100% tools. They never really, I mean, they can take a really lead role at the beginning of the song, but by the end they're relegated because I figure out what the song's actually going to be. But they're amazing for prototyping, really. It's the way I see it. That's kind of the main thing. So then looping even further back, you know, that's how you're trying to build your kit, right? So you're trying to build this.
No pun intended.
Yeah.
Looping.
That was actually unintentional.
Yeah.
You're trying to build your kit, so you're trying to build these elements that people can then just use. It speeds up their process. They can use it for, you know, production or kind of getting fresh ideas. At the same time, though, I feel like there's going to be, I mean, it's a Kotek pack, so there's going to be probably a whole folder of just insane miscellaneous textures that nobody could even imagine.
Well, and that's the funny thing is because I sent off what I have so far in my pack. You know, just to get some people to look it over and be like, yeah, that needs more of this and less of that.
Yeah.
And the thing is, what I was thinking about is what I want in a pack, right? And that's coming from a perspective of me, who's someone who's cocky enough to say I can make the bass sounds from scratch. Like, I don't need those, you know?
Yeah.
And like, it's kind of counterintuitive to say that because naturally I would be providing some bass sounds, but I was focusing so much more on like atmospheres, textures, weird glitchy things, kind of non-melodic components. Because in my mind, I was thinking like, why would I write the melodic components of someone else's songs? I would rather give them the things that they aren't going to want to spend the time creating, which is like all that extra shit that ties it together.
Yeah.
But then my team was like, think about this more from like a beginner's producer's perspective, which is that it would be better off to make a well-rounded pack that's kind of got a little bit of everything that anyone can grab, as opposed to like focusing on things that maybe only like more advanced producers would find interest in.
Yeah, and you almost want to just like scratch the surface. So like, you have like a Kotek 808 that is beginner, but in it also, it's got a little bit of an edge of that more complex production. That's something you would do. And then you could do that for almost every, because there's a set of sounds that people use in modern electronic music today. People are going to use an 808. People are going to use a chord patch, and you can just have those so that people can be like, they can riff on those, but then at the same time, they're like, if they really want to get into it, they can either look at the preset packs or they can dig into that sound, look at that waveform and be like, what the hell is he doing in there to give it that extra sound? But it's still usable in all the standard places, because those insane textures, can be great for the kind of music that we're writing, but generally speaking, they're more of a learning tool than they are per se going to be used directly in a track, which a lot of people are probably just going to be using it, just for a track, not like what we would be using it for.
Well, yeah, and that's the funny thing about it too, because if you think about like the sample packs that are really, really good, and like obviously the ones that come to mind are like Cashmere and Virtual Riot. Yeah. Those sounds, the sounds that they put in those packs, they're mixed in such a way that you can just drop the sample onto the project and it's just kind of gonna work. You don't need to do too much, EQing or compression or whatever to make the sound sit into the project. And whether that's, because of the way that they processed it, like kind of in the back a little bit, it's already like, it's a full sound, but maybe it's a little bit more widened so that there's room for all the other stuff that's already going on in your project. But every time I've ever used a Virtual Riot preset, which I have used, I'm not afraid to admit it. You just drop those things in and it's like, wow, like, damn, that sounds really good. Like immediately, you don't even need to change it. But for me, like I was coming from kind of a headspace of like assuming that everyone has the same knowledge and skills that I have, which is it's a hard thing to get out of because, I'm so used to my own process that I'm creating sounds that are super full and rich that I'm like, yes, you're going to EQ this. You're going to take it and you're going to use the frequency range of it that you want, whether maybe you want the mid of it or maybe you want the top end of it or whatever you're going to do. And I'm like kind of leaving it up to interpretation for the producer to use the sample in a way that they want, but they're not going to be able to just drop these things onto their project and have them sound good. Yeah. And so it kind of, it's a double-edged sword because I'm giving them more than they need in order to give them the choice of how to use it. But at the same time, it doesn't work as much of a guide for people to be able to just throw on and then kind of write over, because they're going to have to process it out of the way. Otherwise, it's just going to destroy their songs.
Yeah, it's a trade-off, right? Because, if you want a really beginner pack that's going to work for people, you need to make the choice for them. And then they'll learn about that later on as in the process of making the songs and kind of looking at the samples. But for me and you, we want something that has as many choices as possible. When we buy a sample, we want to be able to do everything with it. If I have a sample that's got delay and reverb on it, I'm like, no, I can add that myself. Don't put delay and reverb on the sound. But all the good ones have that. I want the driest possible sound because I know how to do all that stuff. So
exactly. So it's funny because that ties right into like sort of the way that I imagine constructing presets. So that's the other thing that came up, and this was sort of recent, more recent than the idea of making a sample pack for Splice, but they pitched the idea that like there aren't really many just instrument preset packs. And Splice has instrument presets, which is really cool. They've got Serum, Massive, I believe Spire, and Silent, I think is the last one.
Yeah.
Not 100% sure, but there's the four of them, and I have Massive as well, but I don't have the other two. I have Serum and Massive. And Serum seems to be the most widely used among most people these days. It's kind of like the go-to, like, oh, do you want to make like fat basses or like really rich textured like things? Because it's a wavetable synth, you're naturally going to get some pretty complex sounds out of it.
Yeah.
But when I'm thinking about making a Serum preset, my thoughts are like, create one like sound that can be modulated into another sound, like as a wavetable does, but essentially with the functions decided that like you will create your own rhythm with it later. You will process it later. Whereas when I look at some of the really big sample pack companies like, Cymatics or naturally comes to mind, or Black Octopus Sound. Like shout out to all those guys because they're unreal at producing samples and sound packs for everybody. And I've used all their stuff.
They're instrumental in the entire bass house movement. Like Cymatics, their bass house sounds are like they underlie almost, like I'd probably say like 60% of the tracks.
Yeah, man, those guys are really smart. Like whatever Cymatics is doing, like they know their shit. They know what they're doing when it comes to making samples. And it's funny because I've had like, not arguments, but sort of like, disagreements with people about using samples in that way. And they're like, I don't want to make samples. I want to make all my own stuff from scratch or whatever. And I'm like, listen, like you can, and by all means, like, please do. It's great. And, knowledge is power, especially in the production world.
Yeah.
But like, the thing is, you spend most of your time writing songs, right?
Yeah.
They spend all of their time making sounds. So the chances that their sounds are going to be better than your sounds are pretty high.
Yeah.
Maybe you can write a better song than they can, but their sounds are going to
be better. Exactly. And the only real downside to sample packs is sounding the same as somebody else, using a sound that is in another song. That's really the only real risk. And even then, if you use it in a unique way, and if your song is amazing, you can totally have a sound that's in somebody else's song because it's just so perfect that it doesn't matter. What I was going to say though is it is 100% worth, because I came from, I would say 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, I really figured out synthesis. I just said, I'm going to make every sound that I make. And I would say that at first I was thinking, you got to make all your own sounds. But as I got into it more and more, I realized that the value of that is not that you can just make every sound. It's that you know what sound you need to have. And whether or not you then make that, 3 years later, now I can use a lot of synths and I can make my own presets. I'm still using a lot of sample packs because they're quicker, but I have the knowledge now of which sounds I want and also how to kind of manipulate them. And I can listen to them like, oh, that fits perfect. That's what I want. And that is not something that you get just by using samples. I think it's you will kind of develop that ability over time, but making your own sounds and learning the fundamentals of how those harmonics, everything's coming up, kind of like we were talking in the last episode about operator and figuring out kind of the differences between harmonics and sine waves and all that stuff. That is what will actually train your ear and just make it intuitive. You're like, oh, that's the right sound. That's going to fit in the mix, because a sound might sound cool, but whether or not it fits in the song you've already created is probably the most important question when it comes to grabbing sample packs.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's super interesting too, because like there have been many times where back in the past I was going through samples on Splice or whatever it might be, and I would hear some of these samples and be like, this is garbage. Like, who would ever use this sound, Yeah. And like that was my amateur ear not being able to understand that there is a use for a lot of these sounds, like these more dead sounding things that like, lo-fi sounding things or whatever. And I think it was best said to me by Adam Kirshen, a friend of mine who lives out here. He once said, he's like, sound selection is not so much about the individual sound, but it's about understanding which crappy sample goes with the other crappy samples.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's super interesting that way, because what happens is like over time you do start to develop an ear for understanding things. And like, it seems so complicated when you look at it like from an outside perspective and you look at the entire big picture at once, like even just watching a professional like do an EQ on a track, he'll throw it on there and instantly know where to cut and boost. And it's like, looks so easy. And then you try it and it doesn't, sound good at all or even remotely the same. And that's just because over time, those more subtle, intricate differences start to reveal themselves to you because you internalize the bigger differences first.
Yeah.
So an example I can use about that is like, if I grab even like the most novice of producers, like, and I throw like an EQ onto a song and I'm not playing any audio, but then I just put on a low pass filter and I like pull it down to halfway, I'll be like, what do you think this is going to sound like? And they'll know. You can just look at that EQ and be like, okay, you just filtered off all the high end. Like, you can internalize and imagine what that did to the song without having to listen to it.
Exactly.
You know? So over time, you start to build up an understanding of like, okay, you know, this does this, and the obvious things will come first, but then eventually you'll start to get the ear where you're like, if I put a flanger on this, I know exactly what it will sound like. If I put a frequency shifter on this, I know what it will sound like.
And then
even more
you
detail.
combine them, and that's where it gets really interesting. And for me, one of my favorite things to combine is a filter and a delay. So you basically the same thing. So it's a low pass, you bring down the highs, but then the delay catches them and delays them afterwards. That's one of my favorite sounds that I like to make. Add that to all the sounds. It adds kind of like a texture on top with the original sound being gone, whether it's like a stab or a pluck or whatever. But those things, I can hear that in my head. I understand exactly how it's going to sound. And when I'm listening to a track, I'm like, oh, I need some more high end. Okay, well, that's an option I have. And there's plenty of other options as well. But, you know, using samples, sometimes it's not intuitive. It's because you're just looking at audio. It's not intuitive, that process. Whereas if you do it yourself, that you kind of tease that out. You kind of that you're developing that muscle in your brain, which is, I think for me, that's been the biggest thing. You know, it's learning just kind of how things work. Understanding is like, why do you have to put this saturator here after this thing or there that? But
it's kind of ironic because you by the time you know how to make all of those sounds, that's when you will understand how to use the samples. So it's like you're almost learning how to make all those sounds for no reason, just so that you can kind of read the sample pack and pick the right sounds at the right time.
Exactly, yeah. So I think, honestly, the best approach, at least from my perspective, wouldn't be make every sound from scratch. It's to use both at a time. And always, I think always having samples in your production, especially other people's samples, is a great way. I mean, it's the same idea with putting a reference track at the bottom of your song and using that for the arrangement, using that for the mix. Sample packs are just somebody else's production. So it adds a variable in the mix that's not just everything in your brain, and that helps you kind of grow off it, right? You know, if it's just, you're just in an echo chamber of only your own sounds, it's a lot harder to grow when you throw something random in the mix and kind of force yourself out of your patterns. I think it's valuable. So I think both are really good, but a good mixture of the two is probably the healthiest approach.
Yeah. Well, definitely, and it depends what you want to do too, because like you said, using samples is a faster approach, right? Yeah. So there are people who only use samples, and there are excellent producers who only use samples. So that's not to say that like using samples is going to slow down your ability to create sounds, but just like anything, if you only use samples, you're going to have a lot of practice using samples. So you're going to start to see like which samples go with other samples. Yeah. We should have a counter for how many times we say samples in this episode.
Yeah. So I was thinking of a funny little metaphor about this.
Yeah.
So you know how like people talk about like gut health, right? You want to keep your stomach healthy and all that. Samples are like yogurt. So yogurt like introduces fresh new bacteria that's not part of your body and like helps your gut. So samples are like yogurt, you know, just keep that in mind.
Yeah. Very interesting. That's a very, very deep and good analogy.
Yeah, well, I like to bring it down to the yogurt level for anybody that cares about yogurt.
Terry loves yogurt.
Brooklyn Nine-Nine reference for people that haven't seen that. Go watch that. It's amazing.
Unreal show.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Andy Samberg.
Oh, dude. He is the most. I think we've already talked about this. He's got to have one of the best careers of anybody.
I was gonna say the best chins, but
oh yeah. Well, that's. I think they go hand in hand.
They should do a Fairly Odd Parents live action and make him the Crimson Chin. That's deep.
Yeah.
Okay, so. Like you were saying before, and I thought this was really interesting because right when you started to say this, I had this in my mind where you said using a reference track. And I was going to say, when you use samples in your song, you're like using like mini reference sounds,
like
right?
A reference stem almost. Yeah, it's like you're the stems of a remix project. Yeah.
Exactly. So when you do that and when you're combining them, you will make your own sound and be like, why does my like whompin' flumpin' bass sound not sound like this guy's wampus? Like stealing wampus straight from You Suck at Producing there. That's so funny. But so you make a sound, you're like, why does this not sound like that? And it will encourage you, or hopefully it will encourage you and not discourage you, to try and continue to work harder and analyze like what the difference is, you know. And if you're smart, you can use the tools around you to really literally look at it. Like if you can't figure it out with just your ear, you can use some of the visual cues, which is like our spectrums, our phase correlation meters, our whatever our levels or meters, anything, to analyze what is different about this sound that yours doesn't have, and then make the appropriate decisions to, you know, alter your sound to become a bit more like the ones that you're trying to replicate. And
a huge thing for me for that is the envelope of the sound. You know, a lot of people just crank their stuff through a limiter, and what that gives you is a square, because there's just no envelope. It's just loud, and then it's not anymore when you turn the sound off.
This is not an envelope.
And, you know, it really obviously depends on what you're trying to make, but anything that has a bit more dynamic range in the individual sounds, not like the overall dynamic range of the track, there's going to be an envelope. And I mean, for me, it's the drums too, right? You're talking about like ghost notes, and like I've been learning a lot more about how the envelope and the volume and the amplitude of the drum hit really, it's literally just volume and envelope, and it makes a huge difference. And that's really like funk drumming is like entirely that, and then a little bit to do with where it's placed in the beat, or how it's off basically. And
100%.
Samples can teach you that in 2 seconds when you just put them on the timeline, and it's like, oh, there you go, there's the pattern of what's happening, and you don't even have to play it. You can just see it, and just, you know, you can play your notes at the same time as the bar sliding by it. So yeah, exactly. And it's actually, it's kind of funny because you could use samples to like teach yourself how to play drums, especially, or any instrument really, but that's just it, right? So it's like if I write a drum beat and I'm writing something that should have ghost notes in it, but it's like doom doom cut 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 doom cut, and everything is at the exact same volume, you know, you're gonna end up with this lifeless sort of weird dead thing, and you're gonna ask yourself like, why doesn't it sound good? You know, like it doesn't make any sense. Like I just put the samples in at the right rhythm, but then if you drag a loop in that happens to have that same pattern, you'll notice that like some of those snares are a little bit quieter, and especially because they're so visual, you're not doing it in just MIDI. When you bring a sample in, you can see the amplitude right there, and those visual cues are so helpful in regards to like creating your own dynamic range within a drum sample or whatever sample it might be. Basses, you know, having the amplitudes of the basses is also huge as well. You know, having like a really short attacky sound that bumps at a low frequency, or kind of all that stuff. But anyways,
and it's funny that you mentioned basses too, because like I remember like way back in the day, like when I was trying to deal with like making a punchy sub, or like getting like a good sub groove or whatever, and you write this line and you write like these notes that are like, you know, right back to back, one after another, and and it's a square, right? So that's the problem, is like you have your sub envelope that's just like, you know, instant attack and then, you know, instant release, which is great for controlling it. But at the end of the day, if you're writing your bass notes and like each MIDI note is touching the one that's next to it, all you're going to hear is like a minor little like clicky noise between the MIDI notes. You're not going to actually hear a rhythm. And so I had to learn to like give my sub a little bit of decay. So maybe it doesn't sustain at full. You know, and then maybe I use a compressor after that to bring that lower sustain back up, so that when it does attack, it hits harder, the compressor gets hit, pushes it down, and then it goes, and you get that rhythm.
A little pumping rhythm.
And what you end up with is a wave that has a little bit of volume dynamics. And then I remember also, like back in the day, I would try that, and I'm like, all I'm thinking to myself is like, but then it's not loud enough. Like I'm wasting this volume space.
Exactly. Like, so that's where if you, and it's funny because even when it's quieter, the dynamics can make it feel louder.
Yep.
And 100%. even though it's metering quieter, it actually is perceptible when you just hear it and you listen to it a lot. It actually sounds and it feels louder, because that's you know, if you throw a track through a limiter, and even if it's 2 or 3 dB, you know, there's actually the ducking happening on your ozone maximizer or whatever you're using. You know, those, if you have a little 2 dB little drop in your bass waveform, that's gone. It's not there anymore. It's just flat now. And it's, you know, it's going to do that to everything. So think about a hi-hat. This is why I learned this originally through hi-hats in house music, because I had no idea what I was doing, and I would just put a limiter on the end of it, and, you know, it was basically going 6 dB hot through the limiter, and I would get the ducking, and it completely destroys the transients of a house of a hi-hat.
Yeah.
They're just gone. And the hi-hats are incredibly important to have that transient, to have them clean coming through. And really how I fix that for most of my production, if I still want something loud, is, that same limiter, just put that on your basses. And then let your hi-hats come in, group your basses, put a limiter on there, squarify them if you want to, which is what I do a lot. And then let the hi-hats come in clean, just mix those so that they're the right level and they're not getting limited, because you shouldn't be doing that. It really, if I hear a house song that has, you can hear the limiting on the hi-hats, it's like, I can't play this.
It sucks the life out of it. It makes it feel like you can't breathe when the track is going on. And one of the greatest things about house, and I'm not an experienced house listener, but when I have heard good house that like house heads have shown me, like per se, the one thing I notice is that it feels full, but it doesn't feel over full. There's a lot of room to breathe. Almost all my favorite house tracks are like -8 RMS. If you're talking at zero is your thing, and bass house is -3. Joyride's like -2. I know I mix it like -4 if I'm pushing it really hard. And talking zero is like, we're not talking isotope, which goes up to 6. We're just talking 0 is max. But yeah, most of my favorite like old school house is even quieter. It's like -12. But like if you talk like Shiba-san, so like that's high level stuff, but most of their basses are sine waves, and they're pure sine waves. They're not really going into the square territory, right? They don't want that distortion. The squaretory. Squaretory. So if your basses are sines and you're delivering all of that with your low subsine, you're not going to get above -6. There's just no way, unless you completely destroy your drums. They're just basically just square wave drums, and then it's like your bass is sine. It's just going to sound weird. So it's so funny because that concept ties in so much with like everything to do with production, like from a rhythmic standpoint to a dynamic range standpoint to even a mix standpoint. And that is, you must sacrifice something in order to let something else live. You have to sacrifice some of the loudness of your bass sustain if you want that next bass note to hit hard again. And then taking that concept into mixing perspective, it's kind of the same thing where I was like recording my guitar, just like no EQ, coming straight in, like hot, distorted, like fully like, balls to the walls, like full spectrum. And I'm like, this sounds amazing on its own. Why doesn't it mix into the track? And it's like, well, because you didn't sacrifice any of those sounds, and so you're taking up all of the room for the rest of the song. Yeah, and it's the same thing. Imagine if you had a song that this transfers to arrangement too. Imagine if your song was just drops, like it was just the entire time. It would just be boring. That's just house music, like a 2015 festival set. Just fake drop into another drop, double drop into another double drop, so it's a quadruple drop. That being said, there are 100%, everything we're saying, there are 100% genres that actually benefit from just flat. Like hard style and all that stuff. That shit's just it's literally just a block, and it's so flat that the kick drum doesn't even sound like a kick drum anymore. Exactly. It's literally a block, and there's nothing wrong with that, and it's actually good. When you play this at like a crazy European festival, people go off, and that's because it's literally just delivering the maximum amount of energy that you can with the sounds you're using. But just keep in mind what you're writing. That kind of music has almost no groove generally. It's just like it's just a pulse of energy. It's literally like you're sitting there and you're just getting like you're in like a wave pool, and it's just like here's this continuous energy just keeping you going. Whereas if you want to have groove and funk, and that's the genre you're going for, you really got to bring the volume down so you can actually have those variations in volume that lead to groove 100%. And funk and all that kind of stuff. So that's so interesting. It's and this comes back to one of those concepts you hear like when you first start learning about music. If you ever have taken any music lessons or whatever, it's not about the notes that you play so much as it's about the combination of the notes you're playing and the notes you're not playing. I've never heard that before, but that makes 100% sense to me. Yeah. Maybe I should have said rhythms more so, I guess, in that sense. No, that's actually that's why perfect. Rests are important. Exactly. It's not that I haven't heard it and that it's a bad thing. It's just that's actually makes total sense to me. Yeah. It's profound. Super profound, dude. That's deep. I'm 14 and this is deep. Woo. It's not about what you say. It's about what you don't say. Yeah, there's a great Simpsons clip actually of Lisa at a jazz club, and it's like the person's playing like a horrible solo with all the wrong notes. And they're like, man, like why are they playing all the wrong notes? It's like, no, you have to listen to the notes that they're not playing. And it's such a great jazz joke, right? And it's like, okay, to a certain extent. All right, there is a line. But yeah,
it depends on who you're playing for. It really just depends on who you're playing for.
It's true, man. 100%. Like, some people love music that I wouldn't even consider music, and that's just from my own conceited point of view. But at the same time, like, it's just my point of view, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's, just what's your audience, figure that out and make music for them.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why, you can limit the crap out of stuff, because some people that's just, you just got to give them, all the RMSs, all the RMSs.
Yeah, they haven't blown their ears out enough yet to start appreciating dynamic range, but eventually everyone matures to that point.
I feel like there is a bit of an arc. I feel like the longer you listen to music, the more tired you get of that amount. And then it's like, as I listen to R&B, like, that's what I listen to most of the time. I dance to house music, but I listen to R&B, and like I listen to, it's got so much space in it. It's almost entirely acoustic, and that's what I listen to, because it's just relaxing. It's like, it's really nice harmony and really nice jazzy vibes, and it's just really not tiring to listen to. So
I think the greatest. Sorry, go ahead.
But then, like, probably once a month, I'm like, I need house music now, and then when I'm biking, it's like, I need drum and bass now, and I'm just like ripping down the road.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I was gonna say. Is like, I remember, like, as a kid, I listened to a lot of metal and stuff like that. And I mean, I was never into like the crazy blast beat, like nothing, like noise wall the entire time stuff. But I was, always into like heavier, aggressive music. And like, I remember I would like come home and I would listen to it like on my little stereo system that I had and be like stoked and be blasting it. And these days, like, it doesn't mean that I don't love that music anymore, but I don't choose to listen to that in these kinds of settings. Most of the music that I listen to ends up being like really chill, nice, relaxing stuff. And you're lucky if you can find one of those gems of music where it's like, it's perfect as background music, but also very good as active listening music.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's R&B for me, because it's background music, but at the same time, there's so much. A lot of it has incredibly interesting harmonies, rhythms, and like it's mostly just jazz drummers, right? If it's a one that I really like, I don't like when I'm talking R&B, I'm talking like Anderson .Paak, Free Nationals, that kind of stuff, versus like I don't know, like the other R&B that's just like trap beats, like sort
Usher
of
or
like
whatever.
Trap beats with like 808s. I don't really listen to that, because I need to have a drummer. Like, more and more I've realized that like drummers they make songs. I mean, I was listening to Khruangbin as well. I think I was telling you about them, and like their drummer in that band like makes the band. It's playing perfectly straight rhythms, very slight, like almost very little groove. But if that was done with a computer, it would not work. The guy has to be there. The drummer makes a big difference. People that say it's death of drummers is like never.
It's so funny because we can easily rely on a drum machine to groove. I'd say that with quotes, because is it really a groove? I don't know. Like, it definitely is a groove, but like that only goes so far. That works for like a straight time, perfectly quantized kick, backbeat, and snare going on. House, disco, absolutely. Those things work for that, but you're never going to be able to get that, highly detailed groove that's playing with the time and kind of around it, slightly ahead of the beat to imply some tension, or like maybe behind the beat to give you like a looser feel, and that coordination between a real bass player and a real drummer that is keeping a consistent tempo, even though both of them are kind of fluctuating a little bit. Yep. It adds so much life to the song, and like that's something that like, you could try to program and maybe you would succeed too, but like what a nightmare. It'd be so much easier to play it in those situations.
Yep. And the benefit of a live performance, it looks a lot cooler.
Yeah.
Than Simeon using like a randomization knob on the delay of the drum. It's like,
well, that's what always killed me, is the humanize knobs on things, because it's like, to a computer, humanize means play a little bit wrong. But when a human plays it a little bit wrong, they play it a little bit wrong consistently for a reason in one direction. It's not just fluctuating randomly ahead and behind the beat. Like that would give you something that would be like very like discomforting to listen to. Yeah. But they will stay behind the beat for a little while during a certain section to imply a certain feel, and then maybe they'll be ahead of it in a certain section. You know what I mean?
And I bet the drummer doesn't even really know It's like it just it's abstracted, right? The drummer's just like they're just in the groove, right? I mean, you can speak from experience there, but like, are you really like consciously like I'm going to play slightly ahead of the groove here? Like you're just grooving, right? Or is that something you would think?
It actually is kind of both. Sometimes you fall into something that's happening and it starts to feel right.
Yeah.
But what it really comes down to is, I remember this from band class, which is really great, is like we had a guest speaker one time and he's like, whose job is it in the band to keep time? And everyone's like, the drummer. And even the drummer is like, the drummer, and we're like, yeah, we got the right answer. And he's like, no. Every single one of you has that job.
Yeah.
Because when everyone in the band is conscious of the time, it allows the drummer to play around the groove and have the band members trust that he's not dragging. Because if I start playing behind the beat a little bit on purpose and the bass player isn't aware enough to know that I'm doing that to create a certain feel, they will start to lag and then they will start to slow down because now I'm trying to get behind him who's coming behind even more and it will just drag the whole song to a halt. Right.
Yeah.
So
it's just slowly. I just imagine picturing a band where it's like they're playing a really long song. It just gets slower and slower and slower and slower, and then they're just like playing like one note. And then
by the end of it, it's like one beat per minute.
Yeah.
It's absolutely ridiculous. And apparently, actually, funny enough, there's a video that talks about what is the slowest possible tempo.
Shout out to Adam Neely. Isn't it Adam Neely?
Yes, it is. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, 100%. I love that guy. And it says about 33, I think, beats per minute. That is right at the threshold of where two beats can be like far away from each other enough that you can still be like, yep, I feel this as a groove, and not be like, there's a note and then there's like a space and then there's another note that are completely like separate and independent from each other.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is actually a threshold.
That's crazy because that's so close to 20 hertz, which is where we stop hearing tones.
Human, yeah.
And we start hearing beats.
Weird.
It's definitely a coincidence.
That's super interesting.
But yeah, because it's all based on the numerical seconds, right? Because hertz is seconds, so it's cycles per second, and beats is beats per second. So technically speaking, it doesn't matter the length of the second, right? The ratio. So maybe there's something to that because it's just it's a ratio of. I don't know. I can't think of math right now.
Well, it's kind of like just like where certain things leave one spectrum of a concept and enter into another type of concept. It's like, electromagnetic energy becomes light at some point and then it goes off to be something else entirely, right? So it's like rhythm slow enough eventually just becomes so disjointed that it's not a rhythm anymore. It's just a noise and then another noise.
Yeah.
And it, maybe it's not music. And then on the other side of things, if rhythm becomes really, really, really fast, it starts to become pitch. And then you start to go into like melody, which is so weird because it's like we've got all the melody and harmony and like white noise at the very top. And then we come all the way down, we got bass. And then below the bass, we start to get into like below the 20 hertz range where you can't hear the pitch anymore.
Yeah.
And it starts to be rhythmic groove. And it's like all of those concepts from before it becomes melody to after it becomes melody are the things that we use all the way from the very lowest part that we can hear to the very top end of human hearing.
Yeah.
And we utilize it all to bring it together to create some sort of, musical concept, which is really cool.
Yeah. It's all literally just things.
Yeah. And now we're even transcending that. We're literally like, to the point where like musicians have shows that like require the accompaniment of a visual aspect.
Yep.
And they're trying to use other senses. I remember even like bringing this like really far out is like going to like Disneyland or whatever and going to one of those not 3D movies, but it's like a 4D movie. Yeah. Where it's like you're watching a 3D movie, but then all of a sudden a person comes in or then like something happens on the chair and like you get squirted with water and it's like, they're bringing you closer to like inside the concept of the film by like playing with more than just your sense of sight and your sense of sound.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how we can really like break the boundaries of our perceived limitations of music to create a whole experience that like hits you on another level.
Well, and I mean, this is something that I don't think anybody's really done before, and I'm just thinking about it now. Technically speaking, you could do shows that are in like an entirely a VR experience.
Yeah.
Where it's like, instead of having, a light package, and you're standing in a crowd, Obviously, it's not the same because there's not other people around you, but you could have a VR thing where you're literally in a world that is completely reacting to the sound. And you're just in that, and basically it wouldn't even be like a real world, but it could potentially be like, imagine being in a room where the room size changes based on the kick drum.
Yeah.
So like you're literally claustrophobic when like it's like coming in and out, like breathe. Like you could like change the physics of a world that you're in based on the song that you're listening to, which is like, what would that do to your brain? It would.
Yeah. Even the idea, like I've thought about this too, like the position of sound sources too, like. You could make it so like if you're standing over here, it's a completely different song because you've got like a bunch of different instruments that don't exist over there. So it's like if you want to do the bass thing, you just go over to the bass corner where it's just a bunch of basses, or you walk over to the melodic corner. Yeah, you could make, and that'd be a really interesting thing to do. I've always thought about like what would it be like to mix in VR, you know, combining like binaural panning with like actual placement of different experiences based off of your location, like. That's a very immersive concept for a song.
You could walk through the song.
Yeah.
And you could literally go up and like listen to a sound from like different places almost, if that makes sense. I don't even know. You could like imagine if it was just like 2 speakers for every sound and you could like go between them. So you'd be like going inside the sound, and then you could change the I don't know. That's interesting, but that's a...
Well, maybe not best part, but another cool concept about that is like in this world, it might not even be speakers. You know, maybe this sound is personified by some sort of object or creature or something that is in there. And it's like, okay, this like caterpillar is making a weird sound. That's part of the music, and it's like moving around or something, you know? And you can go and look at these sounds, like, and they would be like created like an artist creation the same way we do sound design. It would be like a visual sound component of a song that you can see and then like go and like interact with, which would be like, that's crazy.
Well, you could almost try to represent the actual audio pulses with like light or something. And then you could actually have it like you could see that in some way. I don't even know, but that's to make a sound like that would be very difficult because you'd have to do multi-channel, and then you would have to assign those channels positions in space. But that's somebody's got to make a program. If you're a game developer,
I think it already exists. I'm pretty sure it already exists. There's a VR like audio like program where you can go in and just create sound sources. It's just like Blender or Cinema 4D, like how you create light sources. Yeah. You can create and position different sound sources around the room that are doing different things, and I imagine you could make them look like whatever they want, like that. You know, it's not like a far-fetched concept, so I have no idea. Just look into it.
Yeah, well, I've been looking at VR chat, I know it's a meme thing, but you can actually do audio in it and location, because I love the idea of having... The most important thing for a music festival for me is that it's multiple stages. That's literally the most important thing in my opinion. Being able to like go around and not being able to choose. Like that's one of the really cool parts about it, and be able to kind of walk away, have like a quieter area where you can still hear the music, but it's like the ambiance, and then you can get up to the stage. There's kind of those different levels. It's like you're in a place. I mean, obviously that's what it is, but what's cool about something like VR chat is you can actually do location audio of like a Twitch stream. So you can have a room that has the location of audio of one Twitch stream, and then you could do a room of across the other side that is, you know, you open up a door and it's like stage 2, it's another Twitch stream. And people can be streaming all of those in real time, and you can walk between them. And it'll actually change the volume of how that's being sent to you. So I'm really interested in that.
Well, on that note, 100%, like if I went to a music festival that was only one stage, to me that's a show. Yeah. You know, maybe if it was multiple days, you know, and, you know, other things, you can call it a festival, sure. But definitely like a very important part of the experience of going to a music festival is having that there are different things going on, and you can choose like what you want to, and sometimes you have to make a hard choice or whatever, and that's kind of the fun of it, you know. Like, oh, I gotta run to this guy's set and blah blah blah. Like, I don't even remember the last time I was at a music festival and I watched one whole set all the way through.
You're running around the whole time, you're trying to get the beer line, like it's
100%. So that and then combining that with the fact that the very first time that I ever used VR, I remember it was such an interesting experience because my friend he's like, put it on, and he was in control of what was going on because I didn't know what was happening. And he just put me in a chat room, just a random chat room with some random people, and they're sitting like around a campfire with their computer monitor displayed on the thing. And it's like, it's one thing to like Skype call with someone or your Discord or whatever have you, you know, but it's a whole other thing to be in a 3D space and hear the voice of that person coming from that location, and even to the point where you can see that person's head movements, so you know that they're looking over towards you. And it was such an interesting experience that it really did feel immersive, even though I wasn't getting the, you know, the physical sensations of it. It was really intense.
Well, to bring it into what you were just doing there, you just said really intense, and you were moving your arm like this. That's something that VR it's natural, like, because you often will, if you have controllers, they're in your hand, and hand gestures, people don't realize how much they actually are part of the conversation. And in VR, it's like
gesticulating.
You're not even thinking, you're just moving your arms. And then that's actually being translated in 3D space to the other person. So that can be really cool as well. Also, I went in VR chat without the VR, just kind of on my computer. There's a thing where you can like grab pens and draw in 3D space as well. So you could have like an art wall at the festival and like a bunch of other stuff. But no, I'm really wanting...
Well, and it's cool because you're not even limited to like the bounds of physical space. Like with those art things, like you can like zoom in like a fractal to the point where it's like you've got one piece of art that's fully detailed that's inside a whole other piece of art. And it's like, that's so crazy to me. Like there's little Easter eggs hidden everywhere, and like depends how detailed you want to be, because there's no limits to how far you can zoom in or out.
Well, and I love the idea of like, imagine having a festival. And think about, compare it to a Twitch festival that we see currently. Twitch festival, it's a single stream. I'm not trying to knock them. I'm just trying to say like, these are the differences. This is what we could be doing if we had the technology, and somebody made the app to do this. And I think somebody could potentially be working on it. I'm just not aware of it. But Twitch is like, it's like you're sitting on the side of the road, and the festival's just happening. You're like, it's just a club show, and you're just looking.
Yeah, it's like you didn't buy a ticket. You're like standing outside, and you can hear it.
Yeah,
like,
but you
in
can
full
see
quality
it
somehow,
and you can see the stage clearly, and it's all happening there. But like, you're not really part of it. You're kind of like outside of it. Whereas it's the same thing. So if we're doing what we're talking about, it would be just Twitch stream. You would see it like, you go to the room, and it would be a Twitch stream just on the wall. But then you have the other people around you, and you could even have like a welcome room with like a wall, and everybody can just draw on it and do whatever they want. And it just adds so, for me, I think that's so cool. And I think that I hope with the whole quarantine situation, people like move to these kind of things, because it's, there's no ticket cost. Anybody can go. It's like everybody in the whole world can show up, and it's, I mean, you got to figure out a way to make money for the people that are doing it, but it's,
But there's no resources that you're using up. You know what I mean? It's like you're not actual human bodies taking up space in a venue that's a limited amount of people allowed. You know, it's not like you have to like stock up on beer and whatever. Like everyone's literally like, bring your own whatever. You know. But then like you get the added aspect of human interaction. So that's where Twitch has done a really good job, which is that like when a producer is live streaming, I'm so much more inclined to go hang out there while they're doing it than I ever would be to go sit and watch a 2.5 hour long video of like them doing the same thing, not live. And simply because there are the people on the chat who are talking, and you can talk to them, and you can talk to the person who's live streaming, and like maybe they'll answer you,
and you can rap
or maybe
on the
they
track.
Won't, and that's the fun of it.
You can rap on the track, shout out X and G.
Straight up, they'll put my vocals on. Who knows, right? You know, maybe you'll get a collab out of it. Shout out Mr. Bill. You know, there's tons of different things, right? So it's bringing us one step closer to that interaction that we always kind of wanted at a festival. I mean, it demystifies a little bit of those borders of like, you know, like, oh, it's the artist. You know, like maybe I'll get to talk to him, probably freaking not. You know, like you're going to the festival, you're not probably going to get backstage unless you have some sort of connections with it. But like, it's kind of cool to see people in their natural habitat, like literally, you know, making their things, doing it, and like, you know, being kind enough to show us their process and give away all their secrets and interact and remind us that they are real people. And like, getting to be there and participate like with it is so much more than just watching a movie or watching the aftermath of it afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, really all it boils down to is having a way for the audience to connect with the performer. That's fundamentally all it is. So you need to have some way to do that. You know, in Twitch, it's chat and bits and all the other stuff that they've done. It allows you to kind of have that interaction. It's like a pseudo version of it. And VR is getting closer because you can move around. And it amplifies the interactions between the people. And I mean, often, you know, at a show, it's people jumping up and down and making noise. That's literally the main thing. If you're a DJ, you're just looking to make sure that the crowd is moving and reacting to the story that you're telling. That's literally that's the bottom line. So, you know, in VR, it's going to be hard. Like, you can't really see people dancing per se, but you know, it's at least
you see heads bobbing. Yeah.
I mean, well, I think that if people are going to move into VR, it's actually not going to be per se everybody wearing VR headsets. The way I see it is something like VR chat. It's free and it runs on every computer you could imagine. So anybody can just download this, just like they were going to go to twitch.com and they can just use it. They can join a chat room. Boom, there you go. They don't need to have the VR headset, because from my perspective, it's going to be another couple of years before something like the Oculus Quest, which they just released a new one, but that's the only real thing that's going to make it viable, because I think it's only like $300. That's still expensive. Like, it's not going to be that mainstream. But it has to be a headset that's all included. You just put it on. You don't have to plug it into a computer. You don't have to do any of that stuff. You just put it on. Boom, you're going, and you're off the races.
It's not exactly plug and play yet. I mean, you have to have a really good machine to even run it in the first place, and then you also have to have a bit of know-how with computers in order to like get things running, right?
Well, your USB plug glitching out, like, that's the last thing you don't have to worry about. But that's what the Quest is, just an Android phone.
Oh, wow.
So it's literally just an Android phone built into a headset. It's battery powered. There's no cables. So it's literally it's from Facebook. Crazy. So, but yeah, it's their kind of cheap alternative to like the Vive and all that other stuff.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah,
the concept's there. It's just, it's going to keep advancing. And I mean, there's probably so many things that like we don't even realize are going to be super big and amazing like in the future. It's like, we're just theorizing based off of the small amount of parameters we're given now, which is like, oh, what if we could do VR, you know? And it's like, that took off and became its own thing, and now everyone's innovating that, and like it's only in its baby stages right now. Like, it's going to get way bigger, especially now, like you said, with all this virus stuff. Like, I'm sure the demand for like all those teams working on VR is just like super high. They're like, come on, right now, this is the perfect time to launch this stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, look at how many people are using Zoom right now, and it's a steaming pile of garbage. Like, people hate it. And I'm not saying that they hate it because it's a bad product. It's
shout out Zoom.
The method of communication is not natural. It's so unnatural that people are talking about like Zoom fatigue, because, you know, think about it this way. Imagine like if you just followed yourself around every day, think about how much human interaction you're having. Like, you know, it's multiple hours per day. If you're, you know, spending most of your day doing work on Zoom, you're literally just sitting here in front of your screen looking at this terrible webcam view with really low quality audio, and your brain's like, what the fuck? This is not real. Why am I looking at this? This is really low quality. Whereas VR can, even if it's not, you know, video of the other person, the 3D image of somebody showing more of those things, it's less of the uncanny valley. Because I think the more we're in the uncanny valley, the more your brain is just kind of glitching out, and that kind of causes you to be it's tiresome. Like, you can't, you know, you just can't do it for too long.
I mean, like, we're literally downsampling a dimension when we're dealing with Zoom. You know what I mean? The audio is flat and of lower quality, and we're looking at a 2D screen. Yeah. Whereas, like, with VR, like you said, you've got 3D, so it's as close to, like, replicating the physical world as it can be without the sense of touch. Yeah. But even the audio is three-dimensional, right? So it's like if I turn my head, it's the sound source is going to sound like it's coming from somewhere else, right? So like, it actually feels like you're a little bit more there, right? The immersive experience.
100%. And so then your brain isn't having to do all that extra work where it's processing. It's like saying, oh, this doesn't sound like a regular signal. It's kind of working, doing extra. It's just natural. It's just kind of what it's expecting. So.
Yeah, not to mention, I feel like one of the biggest problems with like the way that Zoom functions is just that like every single sound source is given like the one, stream of bandwidth. So as soon as you have two people talking over each other, it's like, you're fighting to understand one of those things. Whereas in VR chat, that problem is completely mitigated because the sound sources, again, are coming from those locations. So if you want to focus on one sound source, likely they would have the option to like have, the main speaker be a little bit louder, and like you could look at that person and not have to hear the little tiny mumbles that are going on between the two people over there who are closer to each other so they can hear each other, and then you don't have to deal with it. You can actually just move out of the way, which you cannot do in Zoom. You can't just function that like easily, right?
Yeah, well, the way I would see potentially, like, because we're talking working mainly right now, but imagine it's all done in VR, and maybe you're not wearing a goggle, but you have like a monitor up, and you can see like your office per se, and people can like knock on the door. And you would hear like positional audio of like them knocking the door, and you could hear them talking from behind the door, and you'd be like, oh, sorry, I'm busy right now, call me back, or come in later. But then that person can literally just come into the room with you and have a conversation with you, and you're always on the call per se. You're always in the world. But it's more natural instead of it's like, okay, go check your email invite. Okay, go download the link, do all this stuff. It's like, no, we're all just in the office together, and you can just go walk over to the person. If you want to have an extra person, you go see if they're in and get them to walk in as well, and they can talk. Because, even though it's kind of weird, people think like, oh, I'm not a gamer, I don't want to have to like use my ASDW and walk around. Like, it's actually way more natural than going to like a menu and trying to find the right invite in Zoom. It's like, it's intuitive. I think about
like follow me,
Exactly.
Literally,
yeah.
it's like,
it's like, oh, we have one more issue. Let's go talk to Johnny. And you both just get up, walk down the hallway to that person. And the proximity audio is just all happening behind the scenes. So you're not even thinking about it. That's kind of how I see it in the long term, because then, when you're in the office, you just show up and you're just there and you're sitting, and then people can come in if you want. It's actually similar to Discord in that like there's chat rooms. So it's like you can kind of go between them. Discord's like a mini version of that, just a lot more limited.
Still dumbs down a lot, but
and it doesn't work like 95% of the time. This is happening over
we're
TeamSpeak
getting there.
People are wondering. Not Discord.
Yeah, we're getting there.
Yeah.
Oh man, crazy. This conversation went into a lot of places.
This was the Tangent City. We are deep down Tangent City,
down the
and
rabbit
then we
hole.
took a left down Tangent Avenue, and then we moved into Tangent Alleyway
Town,
and then we went down the Tangent manhole cover into the sewers of Tangent Town.
The Tangent sewer. Where everybody's just tangent pooping.
Yeah, the music podcast where we talk about working with VR. Luckily, we only talked for like 10 minutes, so hopefully it wasn't too bad.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's relevant, right? Because we're talking about like festivals and stuff, but it's, this whole world that we're living in right now is crazy because it's making us think about things in a totally different way. Yeah. Which is kind of, it's necessary for change. That's always the kind of the what do you call it, an anecdote where it's, I don't know if this is actually an anecdote, but the whole like, you can't, rebuild unless you tear it down first, right? There's probably a better way to say that, but we're forced into a situation where we can't use our normal resources and our normal means of communication, and it's like that was working for us great, so there was no reason to transition to something else. But now we're at that point where it's like we just don't have it all of a sudden, so we have to figure out a better way to get that experience from a different alternative, and we'll learn a lot from this.
Oh, you're getting a call.
There you go. There goes that.
Still going, dude. It's probably on your computer.
Oh, hold up. I gotta call you back. Oh, whoopsie daisy. This is why we mute our phones.
Still going, dude. It's going on your computer.
Oh God, he's gonna call me back. Oh man. All right. One sec. All right, I just gotta send. Oh my God, he's trying again. Busy. 1 sec. There we go.
It's still ringing, by the way, on your computer.
Oh, is it? Oh my God. Yeah. Oh my God. That's right. I have the thing on. No. Where is it? It's got to be here. No, it's not there. Where is it?
This is one of the things I really hate about Messenger. If you use Firefox, I think it's the same with Chrome. When it rings,
everyone's having this problem right now.
It rings for everybody everywhere. It's like, you hang up. Nope. You have to hang up on every single browser tab that you have it open on.
All right. Anyway,
it's still going.
What? You've got to be kidding me. How many tabs do I have?
Maybe it's...
No
I'm
way.
not getting called, right? Okay, good. I'm not.
There it is. I found it. Oh my God. I have how many Facebooks? Okay.
It's good. We're going to edit this.
Is it still going?
No.
Is it still going?
It's good. It's gone.
All right. That's hilarious. Oh my God. Nightmare.
Well, we were going to talk about Serum. And we've got it up and running because we talked about Operator last time, but we started talking about sample packs, and that led into
everything.
Yeah, and now it's an hour and 7 minutes in.
That's okay. We'll talk about Serum next time. We'll get more specific.
Yeah, I feel like what we talked about though is definitely is
great.
It's good. It's good stuff.
Yeah,
it's good. 100%. They're good dogs, Bront.
Oh God, okay. Good times.
Well, I think on that note, we'll call it quits. Thanks for tuning in, and we will catch you next week with potentially special guests. Ooh.